But today, before we start, this is not financial advice. Subscribe, like, comment. We're going to be doing this every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at noon. So excited to just kind of today hop into what is money really? Have you really thought about that? Adam, I guess where would you like to start with this one today?
The best thing to start with is talking about, well, we kind of touched on it last time, but just talking about currency versus money. The reason we keep trying to hit home with like what that is because I think in order to understand where Bitcoin is important, you have to understand where fiat government issued currency has faults. The best example is actually from the book, the Bitcoin Standard from Saifedean Ammous. He actually talks about it being saleable. So what he says is Bitcoin is saleable against scale, space, and time. Scalability is like the ability to spend money, trade money, so on and so forth. When you talk about scalability or salability across scales, can money be divided and purchase a house? And then can it also be divided down and say purchase like bananas and groceries?
Just kind of diving into the Bitcoin Standard, it was interesting to start thinking about money in a different way from the beginnings, from like medieval times. Today we think of money as like the dollar or whatever country has their specific currency. But when you really dive into the nuts and bolts and like what is it, it's interesting when you get into these basic concepts of what money is.
Which, by the way, if you haven't read the Bitcoin Standard, I think that's one of the most eye-opening books probably ever. I think if you're going to try and go down this journey, I always say start with that book and then maybe move on to like Lynn Alden's Broken Money because again he's going to lay it out in a way that it's like easy to understand and he's going to break down the system in ways you've never thought about. Highly recommend that book.
We'll put that in the link as well.
Yeah.
So the viewers can go check those books out. I just started reading the Bitcoin Standard because Adam told me to hop on that, and it just gets you to really start thinking about things in a different way. Some things that we were talking about today: functions of money, store value, medium of exchange, unit of account. Adam, he was talking about salability a little bit.
I think it's a good definition across space, which is basically is it transportable? Can you transport it to say China or Europe or so on and so forth? So those are the first two scales, then space. But then the third one, which is probably the most important, is salability across time. That's an important concept because that talks about, say, the hardness of money. Does money store value, right? And I think between it being saleable across scales, across space, and across time, if money doesn't meet all three of those, is it actually money? So like the dollar, for example, does it meet all three of those?
That's a good question to ask.
So theoretically, it doesn't meet all three of those. Transportable, it's saleable across scales. It's saleable across space, but it's not really saleable across time. It loses value, right? It doesn't store value. To this day, the only money that's ever existed that stores value over time is gold, right? Gold and well, silver slightly, but mostly gold. Going back to those first principles is critical. If it doesn't meet those first principles, it's probably not the best investment, or in this case, money.
The one question would be if you could pick anything to be money, what would that look like? And that's kind of what you're touching on there a little bit.
If you look at the history, so right now there's 180 currencies that exist throughout the world, with is it the dollar and the euro being like the one that most settlements are utilized from. But if you go back in time, say all the way back to Constantinople, for example, we'll go way back, the Byzantine, which at the time was a really good money. Move forward and you had seashells and you had glass and you had rocks. It didn't matter. Interesting is every currency since the dawn of time, every single one of them has collapsed. It's all due to the inflation. In this case, the ability to create more out of nothing, and well, it loses that salability across time. It loses that
Yep.
store value.
So then you get into like, scarcity, right? We hear about scarcity all the time with currency.
Well, it's an important concept too, right? So when it comes to money, and that's actually a very good point, is it has to be scarce, but it can't be too scarce. So for example, you have the Mona Lisa. Well, it's extremely scarce. It can store value. It's worth lots and lots of dollars, money, whatever you want to say. But there's only one of them. So you can't divide it. You can't utilize it as money. Diamonds, same thing. Diamonds are fairly scarce, but the thing is they're not as divisible, so on and so forth. So the thing is gold happened to just fit all of those key
That's
concepts.
kind of where we landed, yeah, with gold.
Here's a really interesting point. If you look at gold in 1920, I think the average yearly income was something like $3,300 or something along those lines, and the average price of gold was $20. So
Yeah.
in 1920, if you measure your yearly salary in gold, you made something like 158 ounces of gold a year. Fast forward to 2025, the average salary in the US is something like $70,000, and the average price of gold today is almost $4,000 or something like that. I think the average yearly income in gold denomination is something like 21 or 25 ounces a year, meaning that gold basically maintained value, but your average salary in gold terms has exponentially gone down, which is wild because you could buy houses and cars and all that stuff in say 1920 and have money left over. And then you fast forward to today and well, your entire annual salary will buy you barely a down payment on a house. The other things I was going to touch on is that money is really just a measuring tool, right? You had the barter trade system. Obviously, that lasted for quite a while, but the problem is you have what's called the double coincidence of wants, essentially meaning like,
Yeah.
what are the odds you have exactly what I need, and vice versa, right?
You got a cow, I need bananas or something, or like how
Yeah,
many bananas do you need?
yeah, we're probably not going to make the trade, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah,
so
exactly.
right. So the barter system, especially in today, is not going to work. The interesting thing is fiat currency because the supply is constantly expanding forever. How do you measure anything? Right? It's kind of like building a house with a ruler that's constantly changing distances. Like today it's 1 foot, and tomorrow it's a foot and a half, and so on and so forth. So you have this money, this currency that is constantly changing value over time. And so you're trying to price the world and it's damn near impossible. And so,
Mhm.
it's just interesting to think about, I think the aspects, the characteristics of money differently. What's really interesting here is that, one of the things about Bitcoin is that people say, well, it can't be money because it's too new, it's too volatile, things like that. A really interesting concept was actually the euro. Do you know when the euro was created?
When was that created?
The euro was created in, the euro?
Yeah, the euro. Yep. Yeah,
So,
European
so
euro. Yeah.
yeah, it's euro.
Yeah.
The euro is created. Yeah, the dollar in Europe. As
Yeah.
wild as created in 2000 or something along those lines.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was created
Really?
earlier, but it went into effect. Yeah, right. Which is interesting. The euro actually only been around for what 25 years now, and yet it's the second biggest currency in the world. They used it. They created the euro essentially to unite the countries in Europe and make it easy
Yeah,
to use money across borders, whatever. The point is, it's only been around 25 years. Bitcoin's been around 16 years. And so when you talk about money, I mean, fiat money is created infinitely forever. But the takeaway that I think we want everyone to get out of this is that every fiat currency since the dawn of time, it doesn't matter what it is, since Constantinople all the way up to the dollar, if I'm being frank, is going to collapse. I mean, that's absolutely the reality. I mean,
the
whether it
nature of how it's
collapses,
built.
what's that?
It's just the nature of how fiat's built, essentially, or how it's functions, I guess, essentially.
100%, right? And it's because it can be created out of nothing and dilute. I think it's important for people to start to kind of think about like these concepts.
So essentially, viewers, like, leave this episode thinking to yourself, what is money? Why has every fiat failed? Right? Like, start to get curious.
If I were to ask you, do you suspect that the world is going to become more digital or analog? What would you?
Oh, digital for sure. Look at all the AI. The writing's on the wall. So that's the
You know,
curiosity,
I
right?
mean, suspect people start paying attention to these details and start understanding money. So then I think that'll help them understand that Bitcoin fulfills all of these key aspects and it is the most, well, scarce, perfect digital currency in the world, money in the world, really.
For sure. Yeah, and that's something we're learning. Anyways, let's we'll pop off today. Let people get back to work or whatever they're doing before you guys head out. Subscribe, like, comment if you want us to talk about something. Pop it in the comments. Looking forward to seeing you on the next episode.